Welcome to Your Health is Wealth podcast. The podcast invites you to embrace the profound truth that your health is your wealth. I'm your host, Kristen Burke. This podcast aims to take you on a journey into the landscape of alternative medicine, integrative practices, and holistic healing options that empower you to thrive in mind, body, and spirit. Today in our segment titled Episode 8, No Pills, Just Protein, How I Overcame 43 Years of Mental Health Struggles, we're going to uncover the powerful connection between physical health and mental being. We're diving into a truly transformative journey. He shares his personal story of overcoming chronic depression, severe anxiety, and insomnia that plagued him for decades without relying on medications. Instead, he found healing through radical, simple change, eating only meat. It's a story of hope, healing, and a profound impact that nutrition can have on mental health. Now, I know you might be thinking, eating only meat? That sounds radical. But after hearing this story, it may open our minds to the power of food, not just as fuel, but as medicine. Imagine waking up every day with a sense of joy, free from the weight of constant mental health battles. That's what happened after being on this diet for less than a month. His depression lifted and a flood of happiness replaced it. What really struck me is how his journey wasn't about losing weight. It was about regaining mental clarity and peace. It's a powerful reminder that healing can come from unexpected places. Diet is not a one-size-fits-all approach. This approach may not work for everyone, but it is an option that people could evaluate and see if it feels right for them to choose. It made me think about the connection between what we eat and how we feel. Sometimes we underestimate the impact that food has on our mental state, but this story proves it can be life-changing. Whether it's through nutrition, exercise, or mindset, the key is treating ourselves with the care that we deserve. So if you're struggling with mental health, or if you're simply looking to improve your well-being, today's episode is proof that healing is possible. No pills, just protein. It might seem like a big leap, but maybe it's time to trust the process and give your body what it truly needs. That brings me to our guest, Brett Lloyd. He's an advocate for the carnivore lifestyle and a coach dedicated to helping others transform their mental and physical health. After 40 plus years of struggling with depression, anxiety, and insomnia, Brett found relief through an all-meat diet, becoming medication-free and reclaiming his joy. Now he coaches others, guiding them on their own healing journeys and showing how proper nutrition can restore mental clarity, happiness, and well-being. Everybody, please welcome Brett Lloyd to Your Health is Wealth podcast. And Brett, we'd love to hear from you with starting to share a little bit about your background. What was life like before you discovered the carnivore lifestyle?
Christian, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. I'm really excited about this opportunity to share my experience with your audience. To answer your question, not so good with the simple answer. I was raised in a lower middle class family and household in the Huntington, West Virginia area. My parents had an enormous vegetable garden. We had fresh vegetables year round, plenty of meat. Our plates looked like something out of a movie. We had everything. You had your starches, you had fruit, you had fresh vegetables, you had some meat. My parents believed what they were taught about the food pyramid. And that's exactly what they provided for me and my sister, because that's what they thought was best for us. Out of the four of us, my dad passed away in 2020 after 20 plus years with type 2 diabetes that no physician told him he could reverse if he just altered his lifestyle. My mom suffered from many different autoimmune issues over the years. My little baby 6 foot tall sister almost died twice from once from diverticulitis, and then her appendix started leaking. And that one almost took her. That was more recent. That one there almost took her from us, but thankfully. And I suffered for 43 years from chronic mental illness, major depression with psychotic features, chronic anxiety, chronic insomnia. And that's from following the food pyramid. Then my parents told me when I was growing up, I grew up with whatever we put on your plate, that's what you're going to eat. And when you're out on your own, you can eat whatever you want. I took that last part to heart. When I moved out on my own and started living as an adult, my diet was basically beer, pizza, and McDonald's quarter pounders and fries. Once in a while, I would cook in my apartment. I would cook biscuits and gravy. I drank very little water. I drank enormous amounts of soda, Kool-Aid, all sugary, sweet stuff. And my mental health began deteriorating. I know now, looking back over with clear eyes, I started having the sleep disruptions when I was 15 or 16 years old. And I had a promising career in psychology going, and due to my ridiculous behavior and poor choices, I sabotaged that. And when I was 30 years old, I was in an unhappy marriage. I had a son who I adored, and I had to commit myself to a private profit psychiatric hospital in Huntington, West Virginia, because my life became unmanageable. I lied when I didn't need to. I created delusion after delusion. October 1st, 1990, I committed myself to River Park Psychiatric Hospital in Huntington, West Virginia, and was diagnosed with major depression. I spent 16 days there, and I came out with free samples of Prozac. And we'd really like to keep you longer, but your insurance would only pay for 16 days. And I did make some adjustments in my thinking and behavior, but I still wasn't well by any measure. And after this was 1990, Prozac was very expensive to buy. And so when the samples ran out, I didn't have health insurance. I had to let it go and just focus on thinking better thoughts. That was my philosophy. If I think better thoughts, I'll have better outcomes. Me and my first wife split up and was blessed to meet my second and final wife, God willing. We've been together 28 years now and married for 27. And after I met her, I started feeling a whole lot better. We started living together and life was good. But over the next 3 years, we both started to notice that I would get agitated for no apparent reason at times. And I could go from 0 to 1,000 on the anger scale in about half a heartbeat. Physician in Newport, Tennessee told me that if I didn't start taking some medication, my life was going to get very uncomfortable. I was having panic attacks. Anxiety was really wreaking havoc with me. Driving was somebody cut me off and I thought my heart was literally going to jump out of my chest. It was beating so hard. Wasn't beating fast. It was just beating really hard. And one night I had to go to the emergency room because I thought I was having a heart attack, to the point they put the pill underneath my tongue and did all those sorts of things and put me on one of those EKG machines, I believe. And there was nothing wrong with my heart. Thank goodness. I know now I just had a ridiculous panic attack and taking the Prozac. I took it as prescribed. I always took my meds. Got my first doctor when we were living in South Carolina, and he kept me on the Prozac and he said, "You're probably going to have to take this for the rest of your life." Well, I remember hearing an imaginary jail cell door being slammed shut on it. I'm like, man, that's not good news. Because I knew enough from my past experience in the psychology field that psych meds can shorten your lifespan. There's studies to prove this, up to a third. I didn't want to be one of those statistics. So I tried St. John's Wort. tried weaning off the Prozac and trying St. John's wort because we'd read, hey, a lot of people are getting benefits from this versus taking Prozac. And after 3 days, my wife said, you need to start taking the Prozac again. You're getting way out there with your anger and everything. And then there was a specific familial event that happened around 2005 or 2006 that I don't go into details about to protect the innocent. And I had textbook nervous breakdown. I had a 2-month period of time where I did not sleep more than an hour or two a night. And this lasted about 6 to 8 weeks. And when you don't sleep any more than that, really bad things start to happen to you. I started hearing kids playing in the yard during the day, but I was the only one home. And that's not a good sign. That's when my diagnosis got changed from major depression to major depression with psychotic features. And because my anxiety was also way out of control, that's when they put me on Ativan. And then they put me on this lovely drug called trazodone. Trazodone they use off label to help people with untreatable insomnia. And I took, and it did help me sleep. I have to give it credit. That's what it was, why I was taking it. But I woke up with a drug hangover every day of my life for the next 8.5 years. After several months or 3 or 4 years of living that way, man, this is terrible. I'm gaining all this weight. In 1 2-week period, I gained 25 pounds because after 8 weeks, they gave me this drug called Remeron to help me sleep. And Remeron, I come to find out later, is notorious for short-term results and immense weight gain. And I literally put 25 pounds on in 2 weeks. And after that 2-week period, I went back to not sleeping. That's when they brought out the trazodone. Had to take a drug called Symbyax, which is a combination of Prozac with a antipsychotic. And for the next year, I was basically a zombie. I would sleep 10 to 14 hours a day. I had no life. I was just over medicated. I wasn't hearing things. I was a living, breathing lump. It was an existence. It was not living. I'm a musician. I write songs and things of that nature. I didn't touch my guitar for a year because doing anything that might evoke an emotion, that scared the hell out of me. So I went from a highly functional man in good physical condition, relatively speaking, to a frightened lug of a human sitting in a chair all day waiting for the next time to take his next pill. And I'm like, I got to make some changes. I decided I was going to just focus on thinking positively instead of negatively all the time. And for a while, that did work. For a couple of months, we saw progress with that. And then I looked down and I'm like, I'm only 6 foot tall. And I weighed 255 pounds. And I was just like, this is awful. I need to get rid of this. And my wife told me about Atkins diet. And I'm a musician. I was never a nutrition, a foodie guy. I was a meat and taters kind of person with lots of ice cream, coconut cake, and coconut cream pie to boot because got to have dessert. I would have dessert for breakfast on some occasions, but completely ignorant of the damage I was doing to myself. But I did start the Atkins diet and I lost 35 pounds really fast and I started feeling better. But at no time did my wife, my doctor, or I think the dietary change had anything to do with it. I was able to go to my 30-year high school class reunion, had a great time looking at those pictures now. Oh my, I see how heavy I was then, especially compared to now. But I still wasn't, I'm still taking Prozac. I'm still taking Ativan for anxiety when it arises. I'm better, but I'm not well. I was unable to work at all, tried to apply for disability, and I could not intellectually process what was necessary. The only thing I could really keep track of was my medications, and which amazed my wife because depression got to the point where I could no longer accurately perceive my environment. My wife would say, "Hey, Brent, it looks like it's going to be a beautiful day. Maybe let's go for a walk or something." But that's not what I would hear. I genuinely would hear something akin to, "Looks like it's going to be a beautiful day." And I love my wife. "Honey, what's wrong?" And she would look at me like the crazy guy I was. And, "What do you mean what's wrong? I just told you it looks like it's going to be a beautiful day." And I would never hear exactly what she said in the tone with the meaning that she intended. It was always twisted. It was filtered. It was nudged around and never in my favor. This is why I tell people, if anybody's learned a place in heaven, it's my wife who put up with me for those first 20 years of our marriage when I was so hard to live. We're getting to the good part, almost. Then my wife's job moved to Jacksonville, Florida, and we had to come with it because I couldn't work. Moved to a town where we know absolutely no one except the boss lady of the business that my wife worked for. I had to find a new doctor. I called it fishing for doctor fishing. Had some really bad experiences with that. One lady who was, I can't remember what her title was. She was studying to become a doctor, not quite a doctor's assistant, physician's assistant. There we go. And she prescribed a thyroid medication for me without giving me a thyroid test. And I took one dose and I thought the top of my head was literally going to explode. And I sent her a polite, sincere email saying, "Hey, what's going on with this?" And that's when I learned you can get fired as a patient. I didn't know that could happen. I finally found a nurse practitioner who seemed to understand where I was coming from. And she put me on Seroquel, which for about 6 months really worked well. I was able to get back into writing and recording. I actually wrote a 12-song album and released it. But then after 6 months, CMAX followed the course that all the other medications did. Worked for a period of time, and then out of nowhere, for no reason, my mood would crater. Full moons could be a challenge because, hey, the tides respond to full moons. What do you imagine a human body that's 90% water does? Some weekends I would become almost impossible to live with. And the only thing when I would calm down, the only thing we could point to was the moon was full, because there was no other reason for me to have behaved like that we could figure out. Fast forward to January 2015, I'm on 7 different medications. I weigh 289 pounds. My left hip is starting to crumble. I can't raise my right arm up over my head because my shoulder hurts so bad. It's not good. And then I had a psychiatrist, the last psychiatrist I'll ever see, not named Georgia E., told me I seriously needed to consider either electroshock therapy and or long-term inpatient hospitalization. I said no to the inpatient thing because I had a genuine fear that if I went in someplace, assuming we could figure out a way to pay for it, I might never come out, because I read the studies on being sane in insane places. And if you're not careful, you can never come out. And I said a hard no on the ECT because when I was working in the psychiatric field, I saw ECT patients 30 minutes after the procedure. And you're not turning me into a breathing facsimile of a corpse. They look like something out of a horror movie, like the undead. I did not want anything to do with that. I had written some blues music that I knew I couldn't sing, and I put an ad in Craigslist. This very talented lady answered it, and she's coming over and we're working on this music, and she's noticed seeing me fall apart. And she says, "Have you ever tried medical marijuana?" Now, as a musician, it was always around. I messed with it when I was a teenager, had a bad experience, didn't know about just a little bit will do you. Oh no, I had to have a lot. Got sick, passed out, threw up, not fun. Beer was legal. I don't need this anymore. Band practices and at gigs during breaks, joint would come by and I would just hand it off to the next person. It just wasn't for me. I talked with my wife and we're like, we've done everything else. Because I always took my meds. I didn't miss doctor's appointments. I did not want to be crazy. So my wife, we got 4 grams of flour. My wife found a can of butter recipe and she made these little quarter-sized cookies. They weren't carnivore, you'd call them keto cookies. Anyway, and I was scared to death of these things because of the bad experience I had when I was young. So I broke the first one in half and ate it. And 10 minutes after I ate it, Kristen, so help me, it didn't make me high then. I had no high. I just felt like 1,000 suns had lifted off of me. I just didn't feel like crap for the first time. And who knows when. And then the high kicked in 40 minutes later. Much to my surprise, all of my symptoms are practically gone. My mood skyrocketed. The anxiety literally vanished, disappeared. My wife came home from work that day and I met her at the door with a smile on my face and her eyes got big. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. The cookies work. And it took her about 3 weeks of me eating those cookies before she finally believed it. Part of my daily routine was 4:20, I would eat a cookie. And then a friend of mine, the same lady that recommended I try medical marijuana, messaged me one day and said, oh my gosh, you got to go watch every video by this guy named Dr. Jordan Peterson. You have to. You're going to love him. And it turns out she was right. I loved how those were in the days when you first started looking for Jordan Peterson, you saw the Jordan Peterson Destroys collection, where he would render these media people completely speechless with common sense and logic. And so I'm watching, I'm eating my cookie and I'm watching, and I saw a 30-minute cutout on Joe Rogan where Peterson explained how his daughter, Michaela, had eliminated her chronic arthritis and her chronic depression symptoms by just eating beef, salt, and water. Now, this is anybody but Jordan Peterson telling me this.
Can we just pause for a second?
Certain.
I have a lot of questions.
Can you imagine why?
Yeah, I know. Oh my gosh. Okay. Let's go back to the beginning when you were talking about the depression, the sleep, the mental health stuff that you noticed. And when you first started taking the medications, it sounds like it was a cascading effect. One thing was leading to the other.
Pretty much.
This is extremely common. I'm going to throw a stat at you. Okay. 50 million people in the US, I think it's 53 million now, struggle with some form of mental health issue, right? And of that number, 35 million, which is the majority of that number, 53, 35 million is related to drug addiction and suicide. It's just mind-boggling with all of what you went through. And I understand decades ago, they didn't have maybe the research studies they have now. But one of the research studies you were saying talked about psych medications can shorten life by a third. Do you happen to have a couple of references you'd be willing to share? I can
look it up again. It's been years since I was told this at a conference back when I was in the field a long time ago. It was just it was a medication versus therapeutic community type kind of discussion. And the place where I was working at that time was not on trying to push meds on people quite yet. They later went to that modality, but they were more of a therapeutic immediately.
Right. Just when we make statements, I like to have references to back it up. And so I'll search for a few, but if you don't mind doing that would be great.
I'll be happy to.
And with my background in toxicology, I will back up some of the statements you're making in regards to weight gain. You're talking about Remeron for sleep, and you had substantial weight gain.
Mhm.
Weight gain typically leads to diabetes, right? And we know that there are some studies that talk about SSRIs. And for the folks who don't know what an SSRI is, it's a type of antidepressant. It's called a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And that's been linked to factors of leading towards type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
If you're gaining weight, that makes sense.
I got very close I was pre-diabetic
Okay.
in January of 2015 when I started the low carb
Okay.
and the cannabis.
But if you're gaining weight, that's going to cause issues for the endocrine system, right? And all kinds of your hormones, and that in itself, when you have a hormonal imbalance, it can absolutely affect the mood. So I'm just thinking all of this stuff. You said that when you were having issues with sleep and then they were giving you trazodone and SSRIs, even individually in combination, can lead to what we call serotonin syndrome,
Sure, it
which
can.
almost mimics being under the influence of a stimulant, even an illicit stimulant, like some of the behavioral aspects of it, some of the ingestion, like the clinical signs with
Mhm.
dilated pupils. You're on trazodone and you're these sleep aids. Did anyone ever ask you if you had sleep disturbances before saying, now we're going to categorize you in this box of having major depression and psychotic episodes, I think is what you were saying?
Major depression with psychotic features.
Psychotic features.
Mhm.
What does that mean?
If memory serves, it means that my depression got so bad that I had auditory hallucination.
Okay. So would they say that these tendencies would be similar to like schizophrenia or any of those things?
He
Is
didn't,
that what?
the doctor he was just my regular doctor. He wasn't a psychiatrist or
Okay.
anything. And he told me, he said, you're really in a bad way, but I think this is going to there's stronger medications we can give you, but I want to try this first.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. So they're just giving you these medications, they're treating the symptoms, but it doesn't sound like anyone's asking you the questions as what's causing this.
exactly. No
For
one.
example, diet, your
Mhm.
sleep, what kind of stress are you under? Those types of things. Am I right in
Yeah,
assuming?
you're exactly right. He and I did discuss once because it was interesting. He started low carb around the same time I did. This guy was like 6'5", 6'6", and he probably weighed 300. He's a big man.
Mhm.
And he would even exchange recipes on low carb desserts and snacks and things like that with which knowing what I know now, what was he thinking doing that? But he said, I wonder if there's anything with your diet that could be causing this. And I've never heard, which is true. Up to that point, with my background, ain't no one, when I would be in staff meeting and diet was never brought up, never, not a single time did anybody talk about diet. Once in a while, they might mention somebody drinks way too much coffee. And that would be it. There was nothing about diet discussed in those days. Nobody really mentioned it to me at all. And it wasn't until I went carnivore that I began to understand the full breadth of the impact of diet on our mental health.
At least we weren't talking about it here in this country. And
Mhm.
I think that our processed foods weren't as maybe as apparent in the 80s and 90s. It's just snuck up on us, I think, because of the education that we have here in the US. And now that we have this focal point of plant-based, that doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy for you because many plant-based products are processed. I'm thinking, wait a minute. We're putting a processed food in our body. It's a chemical. And the mechanism is similar to pharmaceuticals where it can disrupt your digestive properties, which blocks your ability to absorb nutrients. And when you block
Mhm.
vitamin D, magnesium, and such, and all of these things,
now your tissues are starving for these nutrients, and it's going to affect not only your physiology, obviously your brain, which you need to think clearly. And when we're not thinking clearly, not getting good sleep, and it's certainly the food can be the predominant root issue. Now it's a loop where we're not making the right choices again and eating the wrong foods. Like you were talking about, a lot of sugar, a lot of processed foods, sweets, and not a balanced diet, but then lifestyle, routine, all of these that are actually just going to exacerbate all that stuff. It seems if someone would have thought about that, stopped and said, let's really dive into what's causing this issue and try to remove those causative factors instead of actually piling on to that, which sounds like what they did.
Exactly.
And
No one ever suggested a dietary change to me. No medical professional of any stripe said a word to me that I should
right.
alter my diet and stay away from certain things or et cetera. No one did.
Instead,
It-
the experience you seem to have was you weren't able to work. Your quality of life was greatly decreased. You weren't happy. And essentially, when we medicate, those types of medications you were talking about, detach mind from body. And
Mhm.
when we can't feel it, how do we heal it?
That's
And it
right.
was interesting. I'm going to go back to one of the comments that you made earlier, where you were saying that as you started to take some of these medications, you started to feel joint pain, I think, that you had not
Mhm.
felt before, right?
It was a combination of the medication, long-term use of the meds, plus the weight
Right.
gain together.
But maybe it was there before and you couldn't feel it because of the medication.
I'm,
And we switched the medication, that in combination with the long-term use, and the pain is there speaking to us. Our bodies always speak to us when we have
sure.
indigestion, when we have a headache. Hey, drink more water. When we aren't sleeping, all of these areas that give us discomfort is our body's natural way of saying, wake up and pay
Mhm.
attention to me. I need your help. And many times and I've been guilty of this, we'll push it off and maybe take something that like an aspirin, if you have pain, an analgesic,
Right.
Tylenol, whatever, to get rid of that pain temporarily, hoping it goes away so you can get through the next thing. But at the end of the day, what's going on? What's the underlying issue that
Mhm.
we're avoiding here? And looking at it from a larger scope with a mental health area. If we're not truly looking at what's causing this imbalance, right?
Absolutely.
And for someone to say you're going to have to be on this the rest of your life, that's so daunting.
Absolutely. I thought it was like being told you're going to spend the rest of your life.
Right.
That's how I equated. That's what that felt like to me. I remember that very vividly.
And what I've also seen is I've seen that go either way, where that's one direction a person will go where they just don't like that limiting feeling. But I've also seen folks where they get attached. I am me, right? That's my identity. This, whatever illness or imbalance it might be, right?
And I
So-
fought that because I could feel that happening on occasion where I'm just going to be a depressed guy and I'm just going to have to endure, need to focus on being nicer to my wife and not being so angry but in my mind, I really knew this didn't have to be this way. I just hadn't found the right answer yet. I kept looking, I kept hoping, and something would cross my path, which ultimately happened. I wasn't looking for Jordan Peterson to save me in a podcast.
But you opened yourself up for that.
Exactly.
You were open. You weren't just going, yeah, this is going to be my life. You knew internally, you were in tune enough with your body where you knew there was something other answer. And for the doctor that gave you thyroid medication without even doing any form of diagnostic test is
Malpractice.
mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling to me, but I'm not shocked. And just to clarify, I'm not saying that physicians are guilty of this necessarily. It's the system. It's
Very
the
much so.
system that drives that. And I've spoken to many doctors that feel powerless in some capacity where the way the insurance industry pushes them or their medical system they work within limits their ability to think outside the box sometimes.
Certainly it
Which
does.
is really just, and even more so in the last 5 years.
There's a
Coincidentally,
great book. There's a great book I would recommend to you and your audience by Dr. Ken Berry called Lies My Doctor Told Me.
okay, check that out. And I'll definitely put a link in this episode as well. Lies
Great.
my doctor
Told me.
told me.
Dr. Ken Berry,
Yeah.
B-E-R-Y.
Now, going back to Jordan Peterson, I have listened to many of his talks. You're spot on. He uses common sense and an analytical approach. An analytical mind is good, but I also think that being tuned into your intuition is good. And he also seems intuitive to me.
Very much.
So he uses both sides of the brain, so to speak, the creative and the linear, which I think is what creates that wholeness. And he can very quickly take information in, assimilate it, analyze, and provide a very clear stepwise, this is bad, this is good, here's why, here's blah, blah, blah. It's amazing to me. But I don't know that I've seen that episode. Is that a recent episode on?
No, that's a very old episode. It was a 30-minute cutout of a 3-hour discussion. It was his first or second time on the Rogan podcast.
Okay. And I know he's been on there many times.
Yes, he has. It was let's see, I've been carnivore 6.5 years,
Okay.
going on 7. And so it was May of 2018.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm going to check that out. And again, if I can find that episode, then I'll link that also. We'll check that out. Now, can you go back to the cookies? Because I'm still trying to get the connection here. You were talking about medicinal marijuana, which for the folks to understand, back in the day when they were talking about medicinal marijuana, it was all orally ingested and it was a specific concentration in a capsule, right? I think it was called Marinol.
Right.
And it didn't have necessarily the psychoactive component or...
It was more CBD. It did not have THC, as I recall.
I think it has THC, but it just not... Maybe I'm wrong. I have to look at it
Might
again.
At a minimal amount.
So it didn't have the same psychoactive impact that it would if someone is eating something nowadays, which is... We've seen concentrations of THC up to 90+%, which is over the top, right?
I agree.
Now that if you get over the top to 1 degree, now you're going to start to see negative impacts on the other side of this.
It's like anything else. Too much of something's not good for us.
Exactly. You're talking about the cookies, if I'm hearing you correctly, that your wife was able to get some cannabis.
We got 4 grams of flour, which is a very tiny amount, but I had no tolerance. Put it into little things later that you could eat. Or when she made cookies, she did that. She hadn't made cookies in a long time. I really did the cooking thing for a couple of years.
So the whole time you're using the cookies, you noticed an improvement in your mood and how you felt. Is that what you were?
For the next 3 years, 2015, I started in February with the cookies.
Okay.
By the end of 2015, and I also adopted a low carb diet again too.
Okay.
After I stepped on the scale and saw 289 pounds, I thought, I know how to bring that number down.
Were you taking medications during that time too?
Oh yeah. I was on 7 different meds then.
Okay.
I was on antipsychotics. I was on Seroquel,
right,
Prozac, Ativan, Trazodone, there were periods of time they would try Lamictal, which is, they would use it for an off-label purpose.
Yeah, that's lamotrigine, usually used for anti-seizure medication.
That blunted my affect completely.
Yeah.
I just was emotionless. But yeah, at the end of 2015, I was off all the antidepressants and antipsychotics. At the end of 2016, I was off the Ativan. At the end of 2017, I no longer needed Trazodone. Since 2017, I've had 2 rounds of antibiotics for upper respiratory infection, and those are the only medications I have taken since I started the carnivore lifestyle.
Okay, so you still use the cannabis products?
I still use cannabis.
Okay.
My wife prefers me using cannabis because, let me explain it this way. I was really hard to live with for a number of years. And I created all sorts of awful behaviors that I've mostly gotten rid of now, but I still have rough edges around my behavior at times. Cannabis takes that away
Okay.
completely. And it's not like I'm trying to get so high that I can see God. I use it like a medicine. When I feel like I want to feel, I don't need it anymore until that feeling is gone and I need to replace it.
As I'm trying to understand this whole picture of the medications, I'm just going to say this as a toxicologist, there's just too many.
Oh, way too many.
That we know with drug interaction, right? And
changed my brain, altered my brain chemistry, something awful. I have no doubt, because even after I got well, I would have these periods of simple things would be very difficult for me to process, whether I was under the influence of cannabis or stone cold sober. And I recognized, and I have since learned it's true, that it was because my brain had been so altered from taking those medicines for so long.
But now you're not taking any of them, and you're on, and we're going to get into the diet, and then there's cannabis use. How often is the cannabis use?
It's daily.
Okay.
But like I said, it's used as a medicine. It's not used to party. It's a tool.
Can you share with folks what that means? If it's used as a medicine versus used as something to get high, right? Recreational use. What would be the difference in your
the difference is I wake up every morning. I've got stuff I've got to do. I'm speaking to you. I do all kinds of podcasts for different, not just carnivore, but metaphysical stuff. I'm a musician. I work. I learn new material on a regular basis. I have to be able to process those things. I'm talking to you. I'm sitting in my music room, which also doubles as a recording studio. I'm able to, one of the first things I did after my depression and anxiety and insomnia were gone was I learned how to use the recording tools properly that I could not process before due to my illness and being on too many meds.
Yeah.
And now I can mix something and it'll sound like $1 million. My quality of life is through the roof. And
there we go.
Why mess with what's working?
Quality of life with Western medicine or that area seems to be, let's extend life, but we're not guaranteeing you're going to have a good life.
See, right? if the carnivore diet kills me tomorrow, I won't care, because I will have died happy man.
Because you can feel.
Exactly.
You're connected.
I experience effortless daily happiness every day of my life. I'm smiling. The alarm goes off. I'm not mad. I want to turn it off so I don't wake my wife up, because I get up at 4 and she doesn't get up till 5 something. I'm happy. I'm happy before my feet hit the floor. I've got things to do. First thing I do is I go eat. And then I come meditate, and I just can't wait to do both.
Meditation.
Yes.
Great tool to regulate physiology. And
great way to eliminate anxiety also.
It is.
Without taking the single pill.
And it's a great way to regulate the digestive system, right? Because we know the mind, body.
Your whole physiology.
It does. It does.
Beautiful. I highly recommend it.
When did you start the meditation? What year?
June of 2023.
Oh, okay. We were getting into Jordan Peterson stuff, but I'm going to go back to some other questions if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
You were talking about the different treatments you were dealing with and the different approaches of trying to manage that. You were trying to keep the positive thoughts, which I think is terrific, especially with some of the challenges you were feeling and experiencing. And it didn't feel like you were getting an amount of support necessarily going in a way that you needed.
I would agree with that.
People probably had good intentions, but it isn't necessarily what you needed. So what kind of treatments or approaches did you try over the years to manage your mental health? Were other things that you integrated? Did you try to self-medicate at all? You talked about how you tried cannabis before and there was adverse effects. Was there anything else that you had?
I know this after the fact. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but in my 20s and early 30s, I drank a lot of,
Okay.
and so I know now I was basically medicating myself that way. I was already plummeting back to where I was
Mm-hmm.
when that began. It was just a brief short-term fix. Performing live on stage would be also a short-term fix. I didn't drink too heavily and I didn't do drugs. And I was always on time and I was always prepared to play. So I got a lot of work because I was reliable, even though I
Right.
was a lunatic. But people would tell me, they would tell me, we would love to keep working with you, but you're hard to deal with. And I was just oblivious to that I was offending people and making people annoyed and angry when I didn't need to be.
And I think substance use, like the alcohol,
Mm,
and some of the lifestyle choices can be a distraction from the actual core issue that's causing the disconnect from self. We call it in Ayurveda, we call it mistake of the intellect. And that's when our perception is distorted of that is bad or good and I am this, which is a disconnect from self, from everything else in your environment. And wanting to feel connected is how sometimes people will have form an attachment to something, person, place, thing, substance, whatever. And it could be a coping mechanism,
mhm,
especially if the senses, hearing, touching, taste, all of our senses could be heightened. It's a way of decreasing that sensitivity so it's not so overwhelming. And another way that in the Western world to desensitize is through medication. It's pretty common, more common than not, where people have these stories where they're feeling these heightened senses. And it could be depression, anxiety, mood, what we call imbalances or disorders, whatever the title
mhm,
is. Could be ADHD, could be people that are put titled or compartmentalized on the spectrum. All of the things that those have in common are a heightened sensitivities that are a little off of balance,
mhm.
not in the middle, just and hanging over on that, whatever that side is for too long. You knew that you wanted to get out of that and you wanted to feel, but you wanted to be better. You wanted to, like your wife was noticing some of the stuff and you were trying to take some of the medication, but then you noticed for short term it was working, but long term it wasn't.
That's right.
And for folks out there, most pharmaceuticals were intended to be used for short term use, not long term and for life. And that's what we're seeing as a trend today. And with that, we're seeing adverse effects. If we have, I think you were talking about perception earlier, right?
Yeah, the inability to accurately perceive my environment.
So you're saying that your wife would say one thing, but your perception of what that looked like and what you heard felt differently to you.
Very different. It was like she couldn't understand that I was crazy. She knew it intellectually, but she would talk to me like normal, and I could not process normal on any level. I just couldn't. Not what I heard.
You've said that a few times,
Hmm.
that you're titling yourself as crazy. What if you weren't? What if
Well,
it's just a
today,
symptom?
today I have mixed feelings about that because I know where you're going.
Yeah. The
For
behavior
me,
might be out of balance, but it doesn't mean you
well,
are that, right?
my memory of those days brings me to that word
Okay.
because when I look at one of the things after I got well that I realized I needed to do was I wasn't a 12 stepper, but one of the steps in the 12 steps I think is very helpful in any situation if it's necessary. And that's to make amends to people you've offended or wrong. And so I did that because I knew I had said a lot of awful things to people that didn't deserve it. I cut off people that didn't deserve to be cut off. I did a lot of things that I later regretted as I looked over my shoulder and saw the waste behind me from the war that I had lived.
Mhm.
Because it was like being at war. I was always fighting against myself, internally and externally. It was horrible. It was crazy. It was intellectually, it was void of intellectual pursuit. There was just, what can we think of today that's really bad for me to think about?
Gotcha. But you
Or
pushed through this because you
only
didn't give up in yourself.
because somebody gave me reason to hope.
And taking hope and shifting to faith.
The faith came later.
Okay.
If it hadn't been Jordan Peters, I probably would have just changed the channel because, hey, just eating meat, that's crazy.
Let's talk about what he said on the podcast episode and let's go from there.
Sure. I remember almost word for word. He started out by, disclaimer, I am not speaking as a professional. I am not a nutritionist. I am not a dietitian. This is what my daughter did.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, it was when I learned that he suffered from depression and anxiety, which really blew my mind because I saw some of his lecture videos and I thought he was just tired. Now it makes sense why he looked the way he did, because he was dealing with it. And how he wrote the books that he did while he was unwell, it just blows my mind even more that he was able to do that. He explained that his daughter had started eliminating everything. And she finally got to the place where she's like, okay, let's take it down to just beef, salt, and water and see what happens. And in less than a week, her arthritis was completely gone. And in 2 weeks, her depression was gone. Oh, not better. Gone. I get emotional when I remember this stuff because people don't agree. You've never been depressed. You don't have a clue in the world. I used to describe it as, imagine you had a 50-pound anvil on your head and it was there all day. And it made everything you did all day harder than it needed. And you knew when you went to bed at night, it was going to be there waiting for you in the morning. That's what depression does to you. It's horrible. But because of people like Jordan Peterson and Michaela Peterson have shared their experiences, that's why I do these talks. That's why I do these interviews, because there's people I know who need to hear my story for their benefit, not for mine, because no one deserves to be that unhappy. No one deserves to feel that bad. We all deserve to be well. We weren't put here to be miserable. And we aren't broken. Mom and dad didn't make a mistake. We were just taught to eat a bunch of crap that we should never have put into our mouth the first time. And when you stop consuming that garbage, then your body no longer has to fight against you killing yourself with all the toxins you're putting into it. It can go about spending its energy to repair the damage you've caused.
But you also know what you did for yourself.
I do.
You mentioned you were in jail in your mind, and based on the treatments, this was liberating to you.
Oh, set me free. I couldn't. This kind of conversation would have been impossible without the carnivore lifestyle.
Imagine how many people you have already helped and you will continue to help moving forward by talking about this. Such a topic that's going to resonate with many, probably a huge percentage of population, especially since COVID, because people were, all of that fear that people were put through was trauma. People in the US and around the world were traumatized. One side or the other, depending on, it doesn't matter what the viewpoint was. Everyone was put through, that was craziness, if you want to title that.
I agree.
Put it on that whole thing, right? We all have stories, all different, on how we took a challenge. We walked through the fire on the glass, barefoot, however you want to envision this. And we went through it fearlessly because that was the only direction to go, or giving up. And you made it through on the other side.
I
That's
did.
very inspiring to so many people. And the topic of food is such a big topic right now. This is just going to be supported in so many ways, right? Mental
want to
health
share.
and diet.
I wanted to share something with you. Might cut it out, put it somewhere else, whatever you want to do with it. I got into doing these types of interviews. There was a podcast called the Carnivore Cast. It's no longer in existence. He changed the name of it because he's no longer a carnivore. It's one of those people that it didn't work for him long term. He had to make some adjustments, which is fine. I've never say that this is something everyone should do because it's specific to the individual, what a person's nutritional needs are, et cetera. And it's not my place to make that kind of a statement. It works beautifully for me. But when I did this Carnivore Cast because I thought, hey, people might benefit from it. And hey, maybe half the people here don't understand and get something from the other half won't. Okay. It was all positive feedback. And then I got a message from a voice message from a 22-year-old male who said, Brett, thank you for doing that interview. He said, because of what you said, I decided I didn't want to give up anymore and I wasn't going to kill myself like I had planned. Yeah, I'm a little slow to draw sometimes, but even I was like, okay, God, I got it. I need to tell people I need to do this. And so that's why I've done dozens and dozens of these interviews, because for me, it's a mission of hope. People need to know, like I said, you're not broken. You're not lost. You just need the right information. And the morning that I lost my depression was August 9th, 24 days after I started. My day one was July 16th, 2018, when I started the carnivore lifestyle. On the 10th morning, I woke up without joint pain for the first time as an adult. I was in my late 50s. I had aches and pains. You wake up, nothing hurts. I'm skipping down the sidewalk, giggling like a little kid during my morning walk because it felt so good to move around, pain-free. And then on the 24th day, I'm walking, it's about 6 in the morning. And it was like somebody flipped the switch inside. All that rage, all that darkness, all that shadowy crap, all those things that kept me from being what I wanted to be. It all just went away, vanished completely. And it was replaced with a waterfall of joy that hasn't left me since. Not even when my dad died, he was no longer suffering. Family was no longer suffering watching him suffer. It's a sad day, but it was a good.
Your perception of that experience could have been a whole lot different had you not gone into that diet. Before, it would have been more sorrow. Even though it is a sad day, you still had peace for your father. Absolutely. And you were able to feel the blissful. You were aware of the sadness, but you were feeling blissful for your father because he wasn't suffering anymore.
That's right.
Getting it correct. Because you were connected to self. And it's difficult to feel that experience when we're not connected, right? When we're distracted or disconnected.
I think it's impossible if you're not connected with yourself. You don't feel anything correct.
And hence is why we look for food, or some people gamble, substances, lifestyle, that attachment, which can throw things off.
When I was unwell, use different phrases instead of saying crazy that time. When I was unwell, I was never responsive. I was always reactive. Everything was a reaction. Now, I don't react to anything. I don't need to. I don't need the worst. I now know UPS doesn't have a thing against Brett, and they don't deliver things when they say they're going to, not because they hate me, but because They're just not run well.
Right.
It's not mixed. Whereas before I took it as a personal affront. They had something else. FedEx as well.
Other considerations, right?
Yeah, big time. Big time. Those were the kinds of delusions that I would create. And to be free of all that, I've been doing more metaphysical stuff. I hadn't done the carnivore thing for a while, so I hadn't recited and remembered and felt that memory for a while. It's long overdue. So I thank you for the opportunity to share that.
Absolutely. We're just letting the flow go with this conversation.
Mhm.
Now, for folks who you do coach and you help people with the carnivore diet. Now, for folks, they may have the belief that prevents them from eating meat at all, or they may have had, some people I know have adverse effects to red meat, for example. I study Ayurveda and we try to stay away from meat, and we do use animal products such as ghee, which is clarified butter, and dairy. Sometimes we'll eat eggs, but not consuming meat on a regular basis. I do eat meat, rarely would ingest red meat because it does not always affect me in a positive way.
Sure.
So there's people out there that may not be able to jump right into this diet. What would you tell a person who can't eat red meat? And second of all, a person who can't eat any meat, how would they be able to, is there some compromise or some other approach that you would suggest to them or resource they could look at?
There's a couple of things. First off, I recognize that the carnivore lifestyle is on the extreme end of the curve of the scale,
Mm-hmm.
but that's what works for me. I don't make the assumption, I don't get dogmatic about it and declare that it's going to have the same impact for everyone, because that's just not reality. Because what I eat works for my physiology. What you eat works for your physiology. If we traded, I would be a lunatic again, and you would probably suffer from whatever horrible red reaction from consuming nothing but red meat every day would have on you. There is no one size fits all for diet. It's always specific to the individual. With that said, the two things that I always recommend to everyone, whether they decide they want to eat only meat or not, get rid of the sugar, get rid of all of the sugar. Do not consume anything that converts to sugar after you've swallowed it. And that's mostly highly processed carbs, etc. Don't put those things into your mouth. If you just give up sugar, what is it? There's a gentleman who's got this, no grains, no sugar. A lot of people eliminate their arthritis with that. A lot of people, they've improved. Their depression isn't as severe as it once was. Any ketogenic diet, I highly recommend. If you can process animal fat, because fat's really important for that. Unless somebody specifically comes to me and says, I want you to teach me how to do the carnivore lifestyle. I don't try to push this way of eating on anybody, because that's not my purpose. I'm an example of what can happen if you adopt the carnivore lifestyle, but I'm just an example.
I think that's awesome though, because there's going to be other people that are going to align with some of this similar struggles, and this may very well be helpful to them. And how long did it take to see? I think you talked about it took about 24 days, right?
24 days to lose the depression. It took 6 months before the anxiety was completely gone, and it took 10 months before the insomnia was resolved.
Pretty quick.
Oh yeah, big time.
And
especially the depression thing. That's very atypical. And I want to make this point because I think it's really important, because a lot of people will say, why it's not working for me? It's 23 days and I'm not feeling any better. And I'm like, listen, it's just because I healed quickly. It's not an indication that everybody does, because most people don't heal that fast. And I've thought about it a lot. And I think it's because I was really low carb for 2 years before I started carnivore. That's why.
You were already transitioning to that diet.
My transition period was only it only lasted a couple of weeks. I had the last headache I've had in 6.5 years, and I was a little gassy. That was it. That was it. I have had no problems at all since. None.
That's really amazing.
I only eat when I'm hungry. I do not snack. People are like, there's all these carnivore snacks. We'd love for you to try them out and give us a review. And I'm like, I'd love to give a review, but I don't eat snacks. I'm a carnivore. One of the rules is only eat when you're hungry. And when you're hungry, eat until you're not another bite full.
Exactly.
Total satiation. And when you do that, it's not 2 hours later, you're not hungry. 3 hours, not hungry. 5 and 6 hours, yeah, I'm starting to get a little peckish then. Snacks? What are those? We don't have them in our house. Don't need them.
So when you were first learning about this full carnivore diet, did it seem outlandish to you?
No, not at the time. The reason why I was so desperate. If somebody had earned my respect, like Jordan Peterson had at that point, and told me, hey, if you get gravel that looks like this and eat 3 of these, you'll be better, I would have probably tried. I was that desperate for something to help me feel better.
I work in Ayurveda and usually folks in the alternative medicine modalities. Our clients and patients are some of the most challenging cases. And it's because they are to the point where nothing else worked for them. And Western medicine had tried X, Y, and Z, and they haven't gone into the root cause. It takes a while for us to dig through that and figure out. And the other part of that is to convince the person that if you remove these causative factors, this is the other side. We can't expect them to do it all at once because it took all those years to get into that lifestyle, number one.
Sure.
Number two, they're not going to feel the positive effects immediately. And we don't want to de-incentivize them by them still feeling bad, but yet they're now giving up all of these things that made them feel temporarily good. So we just pick a few things, and as they start to feel better, that incentivizes them to make a bigger change. So it sounds like to me with that transition, with the low carb diet, you were seeing some positive effects. And so that gave you that faith more so to move forward with something that would be normally considered way out there as far as diet with just water and meat, right? You're not even taking in dairy?
No. I quit drinking milk in July 2018 because it was too sweet to me all of a sudden. And I didn't eat. I started out with steak, bacon, and eggs. And I gave up the eggs after a couple of weeks because they stopped being satisfying. And the directions that I was taught from 10-year plus veterans of the carnivore lifestyle is only eat when you're hungry. When you're hungry, only eat meat until you're not another bite full. Only eat the meat that you crave, that you can afford. And under no circumstance do you ever put any kind of a sweet taste in your mouth. Those are the directions. That's it. 4 simple directions.
Especially if you're eating that much meat, if you put something sweet with it, it's going to ferment. It's going to cause a lot of gas and a lot of indigestion in the body. And with the animal protein of any form, FYI.
We found out, me and my wife, what the root cause of all my problems were. And it was sugar consumption. I'll tell you how we learned about it. 2 experiences. 1, 6 weeks into carnivore, and the depression's gone. Life's pretty good. I'm out with my wife. We're at a grocery store, and in the checkout line, there's this display of these mints. 0 carb, no sugar. I looked at my wife and said, that's me. I'm 0 carb, no sugar. These things were a quarter to the size of a dime. And I plopped 2 of those in my mouth. Between the cash register and the car, my behavior changed downward. Before my wife drove us out of the parking lot, she looks at me and says, you're not being very nice to me all of a sudden. You sound like you used to. And then we found out that the sweetener is a sugar alcohol. combination. And then the second time, we're at a Brazilian restaurant, Fogo de Chao. And whenever we go to those, we always look at the salad bars just to see them, to see what the people are eating, because we're not going to consume that. And it's just once he had just this plate piled this high with bacon, and it was some of the prettiest bacon I've ever seen in my life. You know, what did I do? I got a plate and I grabbed a big handful of that and I put that. We go back and sit down and I shoved 3 pieces in my mouth. And before I could swallow, I'm like, oh my God, what did they do to this? This is sugar. They had based that bacon with brown sugar. Now, why the hell would anybody do that to bacon? It's bacon. It doesn't need any assistance to taste good. It took me 4 or 5 days before I got back to my version of normal from that. And I had to use a lot of cannabis to keep from being just awful with my things I would say, things I was thinking. It happened like that. So I don't take chances. If there is any chance there could be sugar in something, I don't care if it'll make all my hair grow back. I'm not putting it in my mouth. It's not worth the risk to me. My sanity is my most prized possession. And I went through hell and back to get it. I am not going to give it away for a moment of mouth pleasure, which now probably wouldn't be very pleasurable at all. Because when you don't put garbage into your mouth and then you see it, you smell it, it's not attractive. In many grocery stores, you got to walk through the cereal aisle to get to the meat counter.
You do.
I can smell those oils. I can smell that sugar, and it disgusts me to death.
Because you associate that with how it made you feel.
I know what it would do to me.
And not only that, but it's so addictive. It really is. Sugar is, it's overlooked, and it comes in so many forms that aren't apparent to people when they read the label, because we've been taught if the number one top ingredients are sugar, granulated sugar, raw sugar, whatever, you shouldn't have it. Now, why is it addictive? There's 6 tastes that actually satisfy the mind, right? There's sour, sweet, pungent, salty. So there's 6 different tastes. And sweet is one of them, and it's one of the more common. But once people start to have it one time, and then I even noticed this for me, then now you're sucked back into it. And before you know it, there's inflammation. That's one of the very first signs.
Exactly.
There's headaches. There's skin dries out. That's what I've noticed for myself. I don't know other folks. It's just really, it actually blocks your ability to absorb the nutrients, the nutritious, unctuous nutrients that need to go to the tissues.
I agree.
And obviously, everything in excess is an issue. And if you have, some people do actually need to have a sweet, depending on their physiology. But
Correct.
it's all, the process part of it is not good. There's natural sweet that people would have. Mangoes are really good as in fresh form, just as an example of what I'm trying
I'll
about.
take your word for it. I'm not going to try.
Yeah, no, and I'm not
myself.
trying to encourage you with whatever's working for you. Please keep doing that. I'm just talking about like myself and other folks that I know.
Sure.
We're talking about inflammation. What role do you think inflammation plays in your mental health struggles or in anybody's mental health struggles? And how,
I think
does
it's, go ahead, finish your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. And how does the carnivore diet help to reduce it?
When you don't consume inflammatory materials, there won't be inflammation. We probably are always experiencing a minor level of inflammation because of the process. Cells are dying, cells are being replaced. That's always going on. Before I had the experiences that I did that taught me that sugar was such an inflammatory substance for me, I didn't even really understand the issues of oxalates and the ways that vegetables can cause inflammation, tomatoes and potatoes especially. And what did my family, what was my wife really good at growing tomatoes? Was my dad great at growing tomatoes and potatoes? I was a steak and potatoes guy. So I was constantly consuming oxalate, which is very bad for us over time. It gets into our joints. It's horrible. And I was not aware of any of that until after I got well and started becoming an advocate for the carnivore lifestyle. I had to learn all these things because people needed to understand if it's inflammatory, it's a problem. If it's not inflammatory, eat it until your body says, I don't want it. It's that simple to me. I keep it simple deliberately because I'm a guitar player. I'm not a nutrition expert. I'm not a physiology expert. I'm just a guy who was really lucky. And because I want everybody who was experiencing what I experienced, I want them to get well. And this is a valid way to get well. Is it the first choice I would recommend? No. Not unless you come to me and say you tried low carb and you tried keto first. Then I would say, well, it's time to give carnivore a shot, see what happens. I don't have any physical, I'm 63 years old. I haven't had a headache in 6.5 years, going on 7. In July, it'll be 7 years. I don't have any physiological problems. And you know something else that works out great? When your hormones come into balance, your plumbing works as it was designed to work. My wife went on carnivore. She started a month after I did. And when I didn't die, she had osteoarthritis in her shoulders and in her hands. 6 weeks, it was gone. And when she stopped, she has had a return of arthritis since. Now, she doesn't eat like I do. She'll add cream. She does more dairy. She does things I don't do because it just doesn't work for me. And how many people get to lose osteoarthritis on a daily? It was a big deal.
It's not
to mention she lost like 29 pounds too, which she really liked. And I liked looking at her even more after that. That was awesome. We have a wonderful time. We have an incredible quality of life. And talk about a great marriage repair process. When you're no longer inflamed, you're no longer dissatisfied with everything. If I just got this coffee cup, Kristen, everything in my life would be a whole lot better. But for some reason, after I got the coffee cup in the first 5 minutes, I could find 50 things wrong with it to ensure that I didn't feel very good for very long because I got what I wanted. That dissatisfaction with my wife, amazing cook. She used to make the best homemade pizza. Of course, I don't eat it now. Don't want it, but it was awesome. And I would tell her, don't mess with that recipe. That's perfect. Right. And she was constantly, because she wasn't satisfied, trying to think of new ways to make it. I'm like, but it wasn't until I got well that I was able to understand that.
So what advice would you give others that are considering trying the carnivore diet, particularly those that are struggling with mental health issues and like depression or anxiety?
Be patient, trust the process, trust your body. That's what I recommend, because I know when I have a coaching client and we get on Zoom and the first question they ask me is, how long will it take me to feel better? I know they're legit. They're legit, mentally ill. They're suffering. They're willing to do whatever is necessary. And that most of the people I coach and work with are folks, I'm their last hope. They've tried everything conventional, and they truly believe when they come to me that if I can't help it, they don't know what to do with it. Which, no pressure.
Right. And you did talk about the 22-year-old that gave you feedback, and you've been a public advocate for the carnivore lifestyle, and you shared your experiences on Instagram. That's how we ended up connecting. You reached out and about the podcast, your Health is Wealth podcast. By the way, I'm honored. Thank you so much for doing that. How has the response been from the followers that you have on social media? And have you heard any particularly inspiring stories from your followers that you want to share?
So many. The young man that I mentioned earlier, a lady that I had grown up with, she was a few years older than me. She heard me, saw me on Facebook talking about how much better I felt, etc. And she messaged me, and she said, "What are you doing?" She said, "I've got progressive multiple sclerosis. They tell me I'm going to spend most of the rest of my life in a wheelchair. I'm scared to death. I'm falling all the time. What are you doing?" I just said, "Do you think this will work?" And I'm like, "It worked for me, but I don't know if it'll work for you. I know this. It can't hurt you to try and find out." 6 weeks later, she messaged me. She said, "I fired my doctor today. I've been eating meat and drinking water for 6 weeks and now I'm completely symptom free." Another friend of mine who lives in Missouri, her name is Emily Pitt. She's a public advocate. She also had bipolar disorder and multiple sclerosis, and he eliminated both eating meat and drinking.
That's amazing.
And she's a therapist.
Wow. Do they have to know, do you or do you know if these folks have to check their cholesterol, their blood pressure, or anything like that?
Some people do just because they've heard you ought to check that every so often.
Yeah.
I operate from this position. I don't judge my health based on lab sheets. I judge my health based on how I feel because I don't believe it's possible for me to feel this good and be harming myself at the same time. They just don't go together. And I feel so good. The least little thing, like play with the cat and I get a scratch on my head. I feel that. My body says, "Hey, we're leaking. Just letting you know, it's nothing to worry about, but you're leaking the red stuff." Okay. I don't worry. And that's another thing. The words worry, concerned, afraid are not really a part of my vocabulary anymore. What do I have to be afraid of? As long as my body will tell me if I need to change what I'm eating. That meat that is so delicious that I consume day after day. And you've noticed I only eat ground beef and bacon, lean ground beef and fatty bacon. Every bite of every meal is delicious. It's wonderful. People, don't you get tired of eating the same thing all damn time? What's wrong with you? No, I have free will. If it stops tasting good, that's a sign. If I need to make an adjustment.
I think there's folks that someone pointed something out to me, and I don't remember who it was, that said, I eat to stay healthy, to fuel my body. I don't eat because of the satisfaction of eating all the time. Now, I think that there are people who are, or including myself, I want to enjoy the food, right?
Sure.
But I think the body adjusts to taste when it knows it feels good afterwards too. The psychological component with the mind's gut connection, the brain gut connection.
Exactly.
Now, looking back at your journey, you shared an amazing journey that's going to inspire a lot of people. Looking back, what do you wish you would have known when you were first struggling with the mental health that you know now?
Stop eating. I wish I had known that sugar was the root, the biggest cause of all of this that I had to go through, that it wasn't, the world wasn't against me. I was actually working against myself. And if I had it to do all over again and could take the knowledge I have today with me, let's just start Carnivore now and just enjoy the carnivore lifestyle from the beginning to the end. So we don't have to do that. Repeat that awful part, that 43-year nightmare in the middle of it. Well, I tell my wife, we have such a wonderful quality of life together as a couple now. And I remind her I said, "Isn't it great? We're at the good part of the story."
It really is. And it seems like the common denominator for most people, no matter what your perspective is, to prevent us from happiness or bliss is fear.
Absolutely.
The only thing to fear is fear itself. That's literally can to be so debilitating to the mind and the physiology.
And in truth, fear is a liar most of the time. Unless there's a grizzly bear licking its chops 50 yards away from you, as it's glaring at you, thinking you might be a meal. No, that's an appropriate time to feel a bit anxious and get your
Right.
feet in gear.
Yeah.
Outside of that, what do we have to be afraid of?
Great.
Think about it.
Yeah.
What can we really have to be worried about? What good has being worried ever done any of us?
Waste time and life, time and money and happiness. It robs a person from happiness. We've been dealing with a lot of that in the last decade. A lot of fear. It feels like people are looking that straight on now. More.
Exactly.
Do you believe that there are broader lessons involved with your experience with the carnivore lifestyle that can be applied to other areas of your life and being?
I think one of them is the spiritual component. I really truly believe that when we are good to ourselves, that the universe rewards us. Part of that improved quality of life is the wonderful things that you learn about, you're capable of learning about yourself. The good things about yourself is so important, and never dropping into that negative thought loop again is such a blessing.
It's about energy because you're going to attract the energy that you put out there.
Exactly.
And show yourself some grace, especially if there's a learning opportunity, which most challenges provide blessings on the other side if we're open to seeing it and open to learning from and making adjustments accordingly. So what is your definition of health is wealth? Because the name of the podcast is Your Health is Wealth. And one of my mantras is your health is wealth. Without it, all other things are insignificant. But I'd like to hear from you. What is your definition and how has any of your understanding of that phrase potentially evolved with your journey?
For me, health leads directly to joy, and joy is addictive, it's contagious. It spreads like wildfire when it's shared. To me, joy is the most valuable form of energy on planet Earth. And when you don't consume inflammatory materials, you become healthy. Your body becomes what it was always meant to become. And you are given the opportunity to be the best version of you that has ever walked this earth. Without health, none of that is possible. Without health, or with health, all of it is possible. And I love every moment.
Wonderful insight. Any other last comments or thoughts you'd like to share with the audience about this, about anything as we
Be kind
close
to
out?
yourself. Be kind to yourself, and practice being 5% kinder to everyone around. Practice it until it becomes a habit.
Wonderful advice.
To where if everybody was just 5% kinder to everybody, imagine the difference in our collective United States citizenship. The difference would be immense in our favor collectively and individually. Just 5%. You're 5% kinder, that's going to escalate over time. 10%.
It
so
is.
on.
Yeah. And will reach other people. Each person you come in contact with will feel that energy and it will just exponentially grow over time. Absolutely.
I agree.
There's just side note on that. I practice transcendental meditation, and there are actual scientific studies on you do too, right? On tm.org that talk about, I think it's 1% of the population. When you have a large group, 1% of population meditating all at one time, it actually impacts the other part of that as a
there's
whole.
Studies. Yes, there's studies. They took 1,700 people, didn't tell them that you're all in the same community. And they were asked to meditate with the idea of the intention of reducing crime in the area. And after just a few weeks of their regular meditations for that, crime was down like 86%, some ridiculous number just in a very short period of time.
It was,
I
and
think,
the actual cities that did this are listed on the web on that study, and there's many in California. And we'll have National Meditation Day, or when things were challenging in the past, we as a group meditated, and people can feel it around. They really can. And I took a class not too long ago, and we meditate in class first 10 minutes, and you can feel it.
sure.
It's so calming and peaceful, blissful. And by the way, just as a side note, since you also do TM on tm.org, there's many studies that actually talk about the reduction of cardiovascular disease, depression, anxiety as a result of TM. Actual clinical studies with that. So I encourage people, if you want to take a look at the website, tm.org, and peruse. There's a link that talks about the different scientific studies. So that's great that you're also utilizing that tool.
My biggest regret with regards to that is that I didn't start 20 years sooner. I would have gotten better sooner.
Same, but everything happens the way it's supposed to for a reason. We
It's
don't always know why. It's not always apparent to us. And I used to say the same thing all the time. Gosh, I wish I could have, but it all happens in the right time at the right moment. And when we try to analyze with the mind to say, why isn't this happening? We're not always supposed to know that answer.
Jordan Peterson was the first of what turned out to be 3 humans that I needed to hear from before I started the carnivore lifestyle. And it was all about their integrity that made me believe what they were saying. Very great levels of integrity. Nothing to be gained by misinforming me, and nothing to be gained by my compliance in attempting to live the lifestyle to see what would happen. It was, if I'd have not heard Jordan Peterson first, I would have never gotten to the second, third person. All happened in exactly the way it needed to happen. Me to understand what I needed to understand in the right order.
Do you want to share who the second and third person people were?
I'm reluctant to share the second one because they proved later on to have issues.
Okay.
That's as diplomatic as I could be. But the second one I'll tell you about is one of the most intelligent women I maybe in the Northern Hemisphere, named Amber O'Hearn. She gave a talk at Keto Fest in 2017, where she explained how as a species, we literally came down out of the trees because it grew these big energy demanding brains eating meat. You know, our skeletal structure before agriculture was taller. We had denser bones, and our brains were 300 cc's larger than they are now. After agriculture started, that's when they started finding bad teeth in the ancient burial grounds. It was agriculture's, it's cut back on starvation, but it's also created other health issues for people that I'm hopeful with the new administration and the push for eliminating unhealthy products that this will change. Oh,
I think many of us feel the same. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate all your insights. And I'm sure that there may be questions that come up, especially when we post the episode, and hopefully you're available maybe another time for a follow-up.
love to. Anytime you want to talk, let me know. We'll schedule it and make it work. Because this is one of the most thorough interviews I've ever had. And I want to thank you for that because you dug in deep. Normally what happens in these types of things is why don't you share your experience? And then I talk for 45 minutes, which I'm okay with doing, but the fact that you asked all those questions, it stopped the whole thing to ask. I was like, this guy wants to know the nitty gritty of all the details.
I'm a very curious person that can go one of two ways. Sometimes people not want to answer some of those questions. But I'm very curious because you're so right. There's not a one size fits all approach. We're all different people, and there's something to learn from everybody
Exactly.
as long as our hearts and our minds are open to hear it. And it sounds like yours was, and it still is. And that's what got you where you are today. And I thank you for that. I'm honored to have you on the podcast. I hope you have a beautiful day and week.
Hope you do the same. And thank you for this opportunity to share.
Absolutely. All right. Take great care.
You do the same. Thank you so much.
As we wrap up today's episode of Your Health is Wealth podcast, I want to take a moment to reflect on this incredible story that we just learned about. Overcoming 43 plus years of mental health struggles is no small feat. And what stands out most about today's journey is the power of hope and shifting hope to faith and the unexpected role that nutrition can play on our well-being. Our guest went from years of suffering with depression, anxiety, and insomnia to finding peace and joy through a simple yet radical approach, the carnivore diet. The fact that something fundamental as food could be the key to unlocking mental health transformation is really inspiring. It's taking a complex approach to nutrition and simplifying it. It reminds us that our bodies are resilient. When we give our physiology what it truly needs, nourishment, not just the approach of medication, but from real whole foods, fresh cooked foods that are not processed, our bodies have the capacity to heal in ways that might have not been possible before. Or maybe it was always possible, and we've forgotten the basic fundamentals to stay healthy. So if you're out there struggling today and you've heard today's story, it's a reminder that change is possible and change exists within. Trust the process, be patient with yourself, and never stop seeking what works for you. Your health is truly your wealth. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. We are interested in feedback on our episodes and learning what topics you may be interested in for future episodes. Please follow us on Instagram, Your Health is Wealth Podcast. Also, our website, yourhealthiswealth.com. And is spelled with a Z instead of an S for yourhealthiswealth.com. The link to the website is also found on the Instagram bio as well. On our website, we list the episodes, and there is an online form where you can fill it out, share your feedback, ask questions, share input on future topics, and also contact us if you're interested in being featured on the podcast. Topic scope is related to health and wellness. Thank you very much for listening to our podcast today and look forward to more. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.